Welcome to Neurodivergent by Design, a podcast for creatives, deep thinkers, and anyone navigating life a little differently. I'm Debbie, and each week I'll be sharing honest conversations, gentle strategies, and real experiences to help you create a life that works with your brain, not against it. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Neurodivergent by Design. If you're new here, my name is Debbie, and this podcast is a space where we talk honestly about neurodivergence, creativity, burnout, overwhelm, and trying to navigate a world that often wasn't designed with our brains in mind. And today I want to talk about something that I think a lot of neurodivergent people carry quietly, and that's the guilt of resting. Not just physical rest, but emotional rest, mental rest, creative rest, the kind of rest where you stop pushing for a moment and simply exist. Because if you're anything like me, resting doesn't always feel peaceful. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable, sometimes it feels lazy, and sometimes it feels like you should be doing something more productive instead. But honestly, that guilt can become exhausting in itself. For a lot of neurodivergent people, rest isn't something we naturally feel safe doing. We've often grown up feeling like we needed to work harder to keep up, harder to focus, harder to stay organised, harder to manage emotions, harder to fit in socially, harder to appear normal. So over time, many of us develop this belief that our worth is connected to productivity. If we're achieving something, we feel valuable. If we're being productive, we feel safe. If we're constantly moving, planning, creating, helping, fixing, or providing ourselves, then maybe we're enough. But the problem is, our nervous systems often can't sustain that pace long term, especially with ADHD or autism. Because while the outside world may only see someone sitting still, internally there's often constant processing happening. Decision making, masking, sensory regulation, emotional regulation, overthinking conversations, managing routines, trying not to forget things, trying to stay on top of responsibilities. It's tiring. And when you live in that state for long enough, eventually your body starts asking for rest, whether you want it or not. But instead of listening to it compassionately, many of us fight it. We tell ourselves, I haven't earned rest yet. I should be doing more. Other people cope better than me. Why can't I just get on with it? And then resting becomes filled with shame instead of recovery. I think one of the hardest things about neurodivergent burnout is that it often doesn't look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it just looks like staring at your phone for hours, avoiding emails, not replying to messages, losing motivation for things you love, feeling emotionally flat, struggling to start basic tasks, feeling permanently behind. And because society often equates rest with laziness, we judge ourselves harshly for it. But rest is not laziness. Rest is a biological need. And honestly, a lot of neurodivergent people aren't actually resting anyway. We're recovering. There's a difference. Sometimes we're recovering from sensory overload, or social exhaustion, or masking, or emotional overwhelm, or pushing ourselves too hard for too long. And recovery deserves compassion, not criticism. I've had days where I felt guilty for needing quiet, guilty for cancelling plans, guilty for not being productive enough, and guilty for needing space after social interaction. And I know I'm not alone in that, especially when you're ambitious, creative, passionate, and full of ideas. Because many neurodivergent people are incredibly driven people. We want to create, we want to help, we want to build things, we want to make progress. But the problem comes when we treat ourselves like machines instead of humans. Machines can run continuously, humans can't. And neurodivergent nervous systems especially need recovery time. One thing I've slowly been learning is that rest doesn't always have to be earned. You do not have to completely break yourself before you're allowed to slow down. You're allowed to rest because you're tired, and that's enough. And I think many of us need to hear that more often. Something else I've realised is that rest looks different for different people. And for some people, rest is sleep. For others, it's drawing, gaming, walking, being around animals, listening to music, sitting in silence, watching comfort shows, or simply existing without demands for a while. Sometimes rest is reducing input. And if you're neurodivergent, learning what generally regulates your nervous system is incredibly important. Not what looks productive, not what other people think you should do, but what actually helps your brain and body feel safe again. And honestly, that can take time to figure out. Because many of us were never taught to listen to ourselves properly. We were taught to override ourselves, to push through, to ignore discomfort, to just try harder. But constantly overriding your needs eventually catches up with you. And burnout has a way of forcing rest upon us when we don't willingly allow it beforehand. So now I try to look at rest differently. Not as weakness, not as failure, but as maintenance. The same way sleep charges your body, rest charges your nervous system. And I think neurodivergent people often need permission to stop apologising for that. You are not lazy for needing recovery. You are not weak for feeling overwhelmed. And you are not failing because your brain needs a different pace. You're human. And maybe part of healing is learning that your value does not disappear the moment you stop producing something. So if you've been carrying guilt around resting lately, this is your reminder that you're allowed to pause, without earning it, without justifying it, without apologising for it. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of Neurodivergent by Design. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you shared it with someone who might need to hear it too. You can also find me over on YouTube at Pools and Pencils Art, where I share art, creativity and honest conversations around neurodivergence and the creative journey. Take care of yourself, and I'll speak to you again soon. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if this resonated with you, feel free to share it with someone who might need to hear it too. You can also find me over on YouTube and inside my art community, where I help you build confidence in your creativity at your own pace. Until next time, take things gently and create in a way that works for you.